Okay. Good afternoon, judges, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Today's debate is this House believes that civil disobedience can never be justified. Walton House will be proposing, Abbey House opposing. First speaker for Walton, Chris.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair, judges, my fellow speakers and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris and I'm the first proposition speaker proposing the motion, this House believes civil disobedience can never be justified. My fellow speaker Josh will be going over the importance of law and how it relates to a school situation and how patience leads to the development of better justice. And Aziz will be summarising our and the opposition's points. First, I would like to define civil disobedience as the active professed refusal to obey certain laws, demands and commands of a government or an occupying international power. Now, taking this definition into account, understand some of the key features of civil disobedience as breaking the law, which can often lead to the further breaking of law, putting criminal activity in a good light. Also, when someone is civilly disobedient, they put their own personal political opinions above the law, which we believe is wrong. Today, we are fortunate enough to live in a functioning democracy where the rule of law is such an important underlying principle of this. Therefore, knowing this, we cannot justify someone knowingly breaking the law. There is no doubt in my mind that the opposition will recall historical events where civil disobedience may have seemed to be supported with appropriate justice. However, in every possible example of civil disobedience, it has never actually existed within a democracy. Two examples being Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Mahatma Gandhi was living under the British Empire, and Martin Luther King was living under the very undemocratic Jim Crow laws. Further to this, I expect the opposition to bring up another historical event, perhaps the fight against apartheid in South Africa. Now, we can all agree how wrong this was, and we are not trying to argue otherwise. However, I ask you this, do you really think the apartheid would still be going on today in South Africa if it wasn't for the civil disobedience from the South African people and for namesake Nelson Mandela? Rhetorical question, because the answer is of course it wouldn't. It would have been corrected through some other means, and I'll be going over these in a moment. However, first, I would like to bring to your attention some of the methods used by Nelson Mandela in his fight against the apartheid. As I'm sure you're aware, Nelson Mandela was tried in court, and he pleaded guilty to 156 acts of violence, including mobilising, terrorising, bombing campaigns, and most notably in Johannesburg Central Railway Station, where 1 was killed and 23 were injured. Now, I wouldn't even begin to think anyone in this room would justify this. Now, coming back to modern day life, in democracy, which as I said previously, we are lucky enough to live in and enjoy today, there are legal means to address unjust laws. For example, citizens can use the courts, they can lobby elected officials, that through voting, you can even obtain a permit to have a peaceful rally or a demonstration.
Point of interest.
Yes?
This clearly can't be effective if people are having to resort to civil disobedience.
Thank you. Okay, so in summary, civil disobedience bypasses all of these methods I've mentioned. It seeks to use law-breaking in order to achieve such goals. It promotes the disrespect of laws, undermines our democracy, causes demonstrators to break other laws which weren't originally related to the injustice, collateral damage, and on the rare occasion it may result in social change. Yes, this is possible. However, we believe it cannot be justified due to the undeniable amount of negative and externalities it is associated with. Thank you.
Thank you, first speaker. Now the first speaker for Abbey House, Tara.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honourable speakers and judges. This House opposes the motion that civil disobedience can never be justified. I will be speaking about 2 cases in which civil disobedience has definitely been justified. Isabel will be speaking about the legalities of civil disobedience, and Caitlin will be summarising our points. Firstly, I would like to rebut a few of Chris's points. You said that some people are doing it for themselves and they're kind of being selfish in a way. But there have been so many examples, for example, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. They're not doing it for themselves, they're doing it for everyone, to make that society better and more fair and equal. And also, surely the apartheid raised so much awareness to other governments who got involved, and you don't know that governments might have talked to the South African government and got them to change their ways.
Point of information.
Denied. Sometimes people have no choice. You said they should go to the court system and have it done legally. But the black community in America in the 60s and 70s would always have lost due to the middle-class, white man judiciary system. And now, you all know who Rosa Parks is, right? Well, for those of you who've been living under a rock, she was an infamous example of where civil disobedience has peacefully sparked a dramatic change in society. If it wasn't for Rosa Parks, then we would be living in a very different world than that of today. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. This sparked the American civil rights movement of the 20th century, and it triggered the bus boycott.
As you said, it triggered the bus boycott. The fact that she broke the law had nothing to do with the changing of the law. It was the boycott that then led on to the changing of the law.
It was actually her who triggered everyone else to see that this was wrong, and now that someone else had done it, they could rise up as well. So they refused to go on a bus for 381 days. This act of civil disobedience highlighted to people the unfair oppression of the black community. Surely standing up for equal rights is justifiable. Now let's get current. Catalonia. This is where the Catalans are campaigning against the Spanish government for their right to be independent. In 2010, after a ruling by Spain's Constitutional Court, it set limits on Catalonians' claims to nationhood. The region's president at the time, José Montilla, said the ruling
Point
had...
of information.
Yeah?
The reason why there are riots in Catalonia is because two of the heads of that government have been jailed due to an illegal vote being held, which is why the riots have taken place.
Surely freedom of expression is technically it's actually a human right. They said they attacked the dignity of the Catalans. After 3 referendums in 2014, 2015, and the most recent, 2017, all with high percentages of people voting for independence, they are still being denied. I'm sure all of you have seen the horrifying scenes in which police refuse people entry into the polling stations. Surely taking away someone's basic human right to freedom of expression and freedom of speech is what is unjustified in this situation. For Catalans, civil disobedience is the only option for them to be heard and to make a change. These are 2 key examples of where civil disobedience has been essential in bringing about change and raising awareness of significant issues. How can this be unjust? Thank you.
Second speaker for Walton House, Josh.
Honourable Chair, judges, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Abraham Lincoln said that every man remembered that to violate the law is to trample on the blood of his father. So what has happened to us in recent years? When did it become necessary for us to repeat what should be obvious? In no society, whether it is a free society or a tyrannical society, should citizens be given the right to follow the law. There can be no law with the tagline, "If you'd please." I'd ask you to imagine the school setting. In school, we have rules, and those rules are put in place by the people in charge for our safety and better. The school rules state that junior girls, year 9 to 11, must wear school uniform purchased from the school shop. It does not state that junior girls, year 9 to 11, must wear school uniform purchased from the school shop if they want to. The opposition mentioned about peaceful protests, like Rosa Parks. Well, like I said, Rosa Parks broke the law, and she was punished for that. A separate incident, which may have been catalysed by that, but had nothing to do with that, was the fact that people then went on a bus strike. It was not the civil disobediency that changed that law, it was the bus strike and the bus companies.
Point of interest, the fact that she actually did what she did on the bus gave way for other people to follow her and to therefore triggered the bus boycott, which you're correctly saying did therefore trigger the law change.
So, as they're implying that the blacks didn't know they were oppressed until Rosa Parks pointed it out to them, and they would not possibly have done anything about it without Rosa Parks pointing out that they were oppressed.
Point of interest.
Denied. The people have done this before when they want to change laws. We can name countless: the Nazis, the Malcolm X, the Ku Klux Klanners. They've repeatedly and directly challenged principles in the interest of taking law into their own hands.
Point of interest.
Accepted.
So you say about Nazis. Technically, it was the law. Surely people standing up against the Holocaust is justifiable. So you're saying it's not justified standing up against the law. That is definitely wrong.
I'm saying that the Nazis who were taking the law into their own hands is wrong. Anyway, we wish that heaven on earth would be a possibility and that we could have the perfect ideals of justice and freedom. But we can't, especially not if we allow anarchy to thrive. However, it is possible to continue patiently to build the processes which allow better justice. But this isn't an instant process. This process won't happen overnight, and we can't allow shortcuts such as civil disobediency to be justified. Righteous civil disobediency. This is a term that's often used, but we can accept that there's no point for violence. We can't justify violent disbehaviour, so why can we justify it if it's non-violent? Our grievances can't be settled on the streets. We have to settle them in the court of law. We can't use muscle instead of morality. We have to use our minds and not our biceps or our quads. We need to educate ourselves in how to better, not go and not skip leg day. The emphasis for the future of change has to be on the 3 R's: reason, responsibility and respect. And we have a daily duty to eliminate discrimination and to prove equal justice for everyone, in the interest of everyone. And allowing civil disobediency on the streets, this becomes impossible. Finally, as Derek Adams, the deputy for the United Nations Peace Programme in West Africa said, freedom is not some easy gift of nature. It's not a plant of liberty under law. It is a fragile flower. It must be nurtured again and again by each generation. If we let a year of untenderness be sanctioned, then the jungle of anarchy threatens to recapture the garden. Thank you.
Second speaker for Abbey House, Isabel.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for some really great points that you've made. I'd like to respond to what Chris said originally, that people who partake in civil disobedience are putting their personal beliefs above the law. Now, if we give power to the law by voting, and the laws are there to protect the people, then surely it's our right to put our beliefs above the law, since the laws were there to protect us and we have voted and given power to the laws. Also, Josh, you mentioned that the Ku Klux Klan took part in civil disobedience. Actually, the Ku Klux Klan, because of how horrific the Jim Crow laws were not actually disobeying the laws because of how the Jim Crow laws were set up. Okay, so I'm sure you've all been listening, but I'd like to redefine civil disobedience. So civil disobedience is defined as the refusal to comply with certain laws considered unjust as a form of peaceful protest. And I'd like to point out two different words.
Point of
in this.
information. The definition I gave is the international definition for civil disobedience. The one you've made is one you're picking to suit your side of the argument.
Actually, it's the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So that says laws considered unjust and a peaceful form of protest. So we're not supporting violence, we're supporting a peaceful form of protest. And the laws are what are considered unjust, not the act of standing up against the laws. So democracies today are arguably derived from John Locke's 2 treatises of government, published in 1690. And John Locke makes 3 crucial points. He first says that the government gets its power from the people, which is true in democracies as we vote for our government officials and we abide by laws giving power to the government. Then he goes on to say that the purpose of the government are to protect people's rights. So this is what our laws are meant to do, protect our basic human rights. And his third and final most important point is that people have the right to alter the government if they fail their fundamental duty. This duty is to protect our rights. So Locke is saying that if they are not protecting our rights, we have the right to alter our government, and civil disobedience is our way of altering our government. Now, if you don't believe the father of modern democracy, maybe the US Constitution. So the First Amendment gives us our rights: the freedom to speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom to peaceably assemble, and the freedom to petition. And together, this is what civil disobedience is: speaking out against a law, using the press to speak out against the law, assembling in protest against a law, and petitioning against our laws. So we're given this right. In the Human Rights Act of 1998 in the UK, Article 11 gives us the right to protest. So this is an intrinsic right. And the reason this is so important is we must be able to check the power of our government. If not, we'll quickly revert into totalitarian dictatorship, and no one wants that. This is a way to get our government's attention. It bridges the gap between the common people and the government and helps them know what their people want. Civil disobedience can only occur if a large group of people support the cause. And surely if a large group of people agree, then the law must be unjust and it must be changed. Rosa Parks refusing to get up would have changed nothing. But if it weren't for all of those people coming together to support her cause, and that is what made the change. And as you quoted Lincoln, I'd like to quote some other words of Lincoln. So his infamous Gettysburg Address, the final words are, "A government of the people, for the people, by the people." And if it's government of the people, for the people, and by the people, but the people can't stand up when they disagree with the government, then surely it's not a government of the people, for the people, and by the people.
Please summarize. Summary speaker for Abbey House, Caitlin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honourable judges, fellow speakers. Firstly, I'd like to begin by rebutting your points, and then I will summarise for my team. Josh, you mentioned rules in school, a very good anecdote. However, rules are put in place in schools, such as uniform, by people who do not have to comply with these rules. Therefore, how can you argue that they are correct? For these people do not have to, in the day-to-day life, for example, wear the Year 9 or Year 11 girls' uniform. Secondly, just because rules are put in place, it does not mean they are right. And civil disobedience allows people who believe that these rules are not right to speak out against them. Now, civil disobedience is very important in holding the government accountable for their actions. If we do not allow people to speak out against rules they do not agree with, the government can very quickly turn into a dictatorship, as people will not be able to say whether or not they agree or disagree, and then people will not know if they are making an incorrect judgment or a judgment that is not, as Isabel said, of the people, by the people, or for the people. Isabel also mentioned that the ability to speak out is a basic human right. How can you deny someone their basic human right? You would not deny someone food, water, shelter, companionship. So how dare you decide to deny someone their basic human right to speak out against something that they do not also agree with? Civil disobedience, as Tara has already mentioned, is certainly an effective tool when fighting out or speaking against injustice, and our clear example was Rosa Parks. You mentioned that you felt that Rosa Parks did not was not effective in triggering the change that the bus boycott was. But as I mentioned in my point of interest, the fact that she did not get up for that white person meant that other people saw their gap and saw their opportunity to take a stand for something that they'd been oppressed but they believed in. Now, we put our trust in the government to do what is right for us. And if we believe they are not doing what is right for us, we are justified in speaking out against them. In the same way that if you felt a member of your family or a teacher was making an unjust decision about you, you would have something to say about that. Now, you've mentioned some examples of where civil disobedience has turned into violence. And yes, this is frequently occurring, and we cannot deny that. However, we can say that the causes of this violence are justified. Passion, frustration, anger, and oppression are examples of emotions that trigger violence and allow civil disobedience to stem into violence. Violence originates from being part of a democracy, but being told that you cannot have your say. Yet this is the very definition of being part of a democracy, that you are entitled to have your say. So we should not be here arguing as to whether or not civil disobedience is justifiable. We should be looking at ways in which to improve people's ability to speak out against something they do not agree with, because clearly the methods that you have mentioned are not effective. Thank you.
Summary speaker from Walton House, Aziz.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair, judges, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aziz, and today I'll be summarising this debate. Whilst it has been a very interesting debate, and we have heard very animated definitions of civil disobedience from the opposition today, it is in your best interest, and for the sake of discouraging our pupils here at Millfield to start a riot, that I uncloud your judgment and clear up any misconceptions that may have been caused by the opposition's far-reaching but condonable points. But before I give you that privilege, I'll first summarise the points the opposition has made, followed by the points my fellow partners have made. Firstly, Chris defined civil disobedience as being the active professed refusal to obey certain laws, demands and commands of a government or an occupying international power. The opposition followed this definition with one of their own, which I must say, till this moment, I'm not really convinced that exactly how it was defined by a reliable source. You stated that the refusal to civil disobedience can be defined as the refusal to comply with certain laws and take part in peaceful protests. But protests aren't considered an act of civil disobedience. In fact, they are 100% legal. The opposition also stated by Tara, where she said black people would have lost if they turned to other alternatives to civil disobedience. However, we stated that we now live in a democracy where such factors will be considered. You also stated that Rosa Parks was under unfair oppression, and standing up for people's rights can be justified, so therefore civil disobedience can be justified. That's a fair point, but not really relevant to anything we've been talking about today. At the time in America, they were naive, which is why they acted the way they did, and which is why they had the laws that they did. Today, can pupils be civil disobedient about uniforms because they do not see the point of it? But the headmaster does. Will it be justified if we all didn't wear a uniform? You also mentioned that people that set uniform rules do not have to comply with this. But they once did wear uniforms, and they do now realize the importance of wearing uniforms and that it causes people to be respectful and obey certain rules. Isabel stated that, mentioned Locke's 3 points, which included the way laws are set to protect our rights. And she mentioned the Constitution of America, saying that people have the freedom of speech. Now, I don't really mean to state the obvious, but we are in the United Kingdom and we do follow the democracy. To summarize the points my fellow partners Chris made, he stated the fact that we live in a functioning democracy, with the rule of law being one of the most important underlying principles that pivot this country. And I cannot see a single flaw in his statement. I'd like to invite you all to visualize with me for a brief moment Imagine some acceptations were made to school rules because we all stood against them. But shortly after, with the said occurrence of social change, there were barely any rules left. Could you imagine the anarchy we would be living in? Now, I can see some of you smiling to the idea that we'd be living without rules. But on a serious note, our safety will be jeopardized. And that's effectively what happens with civil disobedience. If civil disobedience can be justified and laws are not accepted, then what's the point of having rules to start with? Josh went on to say that there should be an element of citizenship responsibility when people find that they face laws that are unjust. However, he did not undermine where we, the proposition, stand on human rights. More so, violence has for too long been a way of mankind's life, and the imperfections of society are tearing down the structure that the law has put in place. Effectively, this is what civil disobedience can lead to. Ladies and gentlemen, it's easy for the opposition to stand here and to try and justify civil disobedience, or they have not personally been affected by it. I, on the other hand, have. I lived in Bahrain, where between 2011 and 2013, one of the most violent protests I've ever seen in my life took place. But of course, it started exactly how the opposition explained civil disobedience to me. A group of people trying to change a few laws. I'd just like to reiterate, we do not undermine civil disobedience. We are stating that civil disobedience can lead to violence and people dying. Thank you.
Although it means nothing, we're going to take a vote. Who votes on the proposition side, Walton House? And on the opposition side, Abbey House.
Thank you. That's all right. I'm getting used to seeing you perform. Yeah. Well done. Really well done. Well done, boss. I missed you. Sorry. I'm sorry. I've seen you before. You speak well. Thank you. Well done.
No, it's not. I don't know. I've got my shot.
Well, thank you very much, everybody who came along. It's good to see so many people in the audience and to realise that you're listening really carefully to everything that's being said. I'd like to thank our speakers here. They've come a long, long way in this competition. It feels like years ago since the very first debate that we had this year. It's only a few weeks, but the dramatic improvement in the quality of their speaking is really quite phenomenal. It's brilliant to see that all the advice that has been given right along the way has been acted upon, and it's good to see even advice from this time last week being brought in and things being improved and so on, so that's really good. So I think a round of applause to all the speakers first of all. A pretty testing topic, I think you'll agree. I don't know how long it took you to research your ideas there. We were impressed yet again by the quality and the range of ideas that were brought into the debate today, and it's great to see young people engaging with these things that are so very, very crucial. And it's difficult, isn't it, to work out, well, what are you allowed to do? If you really do strongly disagree with a decision that has been made at a very high level, what do you do about it? What is the mechanism by which you make your disagreement known? And at what point does that spill over into civil disobedience? So these are complex issues and issues that I think it's important that we take on board. So a really difficult motion to get your head around, a really difficult motion to explain within the time frame that you've got of just 4 minutes. So well done to all of you, actually. Every single speech was clear. It was pertinent to the motion, it was engaging, and it was grappling with some of those really quite difficult issues. Of course, arguments about democracy and about the Constitution go right to the heart of what it is to be a debater. So in that sense, this is a very good final motion for you to actually grapple with and to get your ideas out. And it was good to see lots of reference to things that have happened in history alongside things that are slap bang relevant to us here in Millfield with your examples about the girls and their uniform and so many other rules that we need to live under as a community to be successful. So we particularly liked the reference to history. We also liked the fact that you're bringing it up to date and putting it within our context here, because that helps your audience to consider the points and the ideas on a very personal and immediate level, which always works if you can get them alongside in that way. Some things that we might have liked to see, perhaps a bit more reference to things that have happened slightly more recently. It was good to have the Catalonia issue brought up a little bit, but would have been good to hear a bit more about perhaps the Arab Spring, maybe even to explore civil disobedience in other realms like WikiLeaks and social media and the impact that those things can have in challenging authority and in trying to rewrite the rule book. But as I say, a lot to do in 4 minutes, so it's amazing that you managed to do what you could. I think, actually, today's debate is probably the best one I've listened to in all the House debates. They have been getting steadily better year on year. Both teams that you see before you today are the very best of what I've heard at Millfield in debating this year. So huge well dones to all of them. I'm not going to announce the winner. I'm going to give that honour to Miss Quello, and I'll pass over to her now. But all I will say is, and I know it's no consolation, but it really was close. Okay.
Yeah, it was incredibly close, and well done to all of you. It's really nice to the number of debates that we watch over the couple of months that we've been doing it now. It's nice to see the progress it's made. Every single debate we see, when people rise up, we do see an incredible amount of progress. Well done. So I'm going to say the winners. I predict a riot, whatever may happen. So this time, it's going to go to Walton.
Very well done.